Just like the rise and fall of civilizations, the environment experiences a similar pattern of prosperous times followed by depletion and changes in the natural environment. Civilizations such as the Greeks, Romans, and ancient Israelites all benefited from the thriving and fertile land around them. However, just as these civilizations have vanished, so too has much of the fertile, prosperous land that they lived on and around. Our study of these ancient civilizations helps to uncover human opinions on the natural environment, how the environment influenced development of civilizations, how civilizations had an impact on the environment, and perhaps even how these factors have influenced attitudes and outlooks today. The analysis of our historical and modern interrelationships with nature form the basis of ecology. The influence and relationship between nature and humankind was recognized early in civilization, with writers such as Hippocrates in ancient Greece observing and noting the effect of climate on human health, temperament, and intelligence, and remarked that civilizations arose in lands of moderate or warm climate with light rainfall, where water supply was a major challenge. However, just as the environment has had an effect on civilizations past and present, so too has humankind had a substantial effect on nature and its processes. Civilizations were only able to be resilient as long as they struck a balance with nature. Many civilizations failed to do so, leading to not only the demise of their empire, but also a demise of the land around them. Early civilization relied wholly on the natural environment. Food, shelter, clothing, weapons, and anything else they needed had to be created from the natural world around them. As their livelihood was based on the environment they lived in, a balance between population and the carrying capacity of the environment had to be reached. They could not overpopulate one area. Doing so would deplete their food source and other elements of the natural world they relied on. Prehistoric civilizations were hunters and gatherers. They depended on nature to supply them with food. The human species is the product of a long evolutionary process in which the ecological balance played the decisive role. Early human beings were just as aware of the change of the seasons in relationship to the natural environment. Seasonal changes brought different food sources, and their great ceremonies were held to coincide with seed time and harvest and their religious observances. Nature was their central focus, influencing not only the natural environment around them, but also their food, water, religious beliefs, and much else of what they did. Many early civilizations were not resilient because they did not observe a balance with nature. The Mesopotamians, an ancient culture that existed in the now Asian side of the Mediterranean area, highly relied on their environment for their civilization. However, rather than holding a belief of oneness with nature, the Mesopotamians practiced more of a separation from it. Formerly known as the Fertile Crescent, the Mesopotamian is only a resemblance of a fertile valley it once was. And this can be attributed to the Mesopotamians' lack of balance with their environment. The Indus Valley people, another early civilization in the Mediterranean area, also did not observe a balance between their culture and the environment. Vegetation around them was destroyed by deforestation and animal grazing, which resulted in high amounts of flooding and erosion. The Egyptians highly valued nature, as demonstrated by their deities and their belief that animals and plants embodied the presence of gods. The Egyptians understood nature, and their land was never forested, which allowed them to maintain flourishing agriculture throughout most of their history. Additionally, the Nile River helped to regulate the soil and waters, allowing the civilization to thrive. The Persians, somewhat like the Egyptians, highly valued nature. They believed in keeping it pure, not polluting resources like water with anything, from urine to dead bodies. However, the Persians still engaged in deforestation, and much of their soil was infertile toward the end of their era. The Persians illustrated a general principle of human ecology. That is, that a good attitude towards nature is not enough. Combined with a good attitude must be accurate knowledge of the workings of nature and the ability to control and direct human impact upon nature in channels which will help rather than hinder the balance of nature. The ancient people of Israel demonstrated a practical insight for ecology. However, as their land was often occupied by forces from other cultures and civilizations, their land experienced deforestation, erosion, and the effects of poor soil, despite the fact they seemed to not only have the right attitude towards nature, but also held agronomically sound beliefs and practices. Like the Egyptians, many of the Greek deities were entwined with nature, as demonstrated by gods and goddesses, such as Demeter, the goddess of plants. The ancient Greeks understood that mankind had a oneness with nature. Not only did the Greeks incorporate environment into their religious beliefs, but they also enjoyed and glorified nature. Classic Greek sculptures and paintings depict the land around them, from animals to plants to water. Poets such as Homer and Sappho wrote poems of the world around them, illustrating pictures of wine-dark sea and the city of Chalcis with its beautiful streams. Even many philosophical writings, such as those by Plato, described the natural world that surrounded the Greek Empire. Additionally, the Greeks took notice when the land's fertility began to decline because of human actions, and felt that many man-made structures, such as canals, were dangerous infringements of the natural order. Describing the human impact on the land, Plato said, "What now remains, compared with what then existed, is like the skeleton of a sick man, all the fat and soft earth having wasted away, and only the bare framework of the land being left." The ancient Greeks questioned the relationship between living things and the environment, and by discovering answers to these questions, they uncovered many ecological principles still observed today. However, though many of the ancients in Greece understood and did not want to disrupt the environment around them, the ecosystem around them was transformed, and because of their activities and structures. The Greek landscape was largely deforested. Wood was needed for structures, transportation, furniture, weapons, and art. Hunting was also very prevalent, stripping the land of many of the animals that once inhabited the area. Other activities that had a noticeable effect on the environment were fishing, mining and quarrying, and the grazing of domesticated animals. Domestic animals were the most consistent and widespread force of environmental degradation in ancient Greece. However, the Greeks did understand how to produce fertile soil using manure, compost, and irrigation, as well as terracing techniques to reduce erosion in order to gain fertile, healthy, and long-lasting soil. In addition to land pollution, Greeks produced air pollution as well. Countless cooking fires, charcoal fires to heat rooms, the smoke from metalworking and pottery firing, none to mention the ubiquitous dusk meant that a city could be seen a long way off because of its smoke. Unlike some of the ancient Greek scholars who were weary of heavily using the land for man-made structures and other uses, the Romans believed that the natural world existed for them to use. However, the Romans preserved agricultural and animistic elements even among the city-dwelling populations of latter times. Like Greek literature, many Roman writings contain elements describing the beauty of nature. Cicero writing, "If we have dwelt some time amid mountain and forest, we take delight in them." Many pieces of artwork created by the Romans were representations of the natural world, and philosophers, like the classical Greek philosophers, wrote regarding their views of nature, its purpose, and its creation. A majority of Roman philosophers believed that altering and building upon the natural world was seen positively as a second built upon the original world of nature. The Romans observed a very utilitarian view of the relationship between humans and the environment. Many Romans were curious about nature. They wanted to understand it. Pliny the Elder and many of the Roman scholars were active reporters of unusual facts, often coupled with colorful fiction. But the lack of direct and systematic observation weakened their accuracy. The Romans wanted to understand nature, however. Their understanding was based largely on misconceptions and myths. The Roman civilization had a large impact on the natural environment, seen not only in Italy, but also in the areas surrounding where the Romans had influence. The loss of forests was the most widespread and noticeable change made in the natural environment by Roman activity. Timber was used for a variety of functions, from housing to weaponry to ships, much like the Greeks. Much of the deforestation seen during the Roman civilization was permanent. The land did not recover. Additionally, the massive deforestation caused flooding and erosion, damaging the land even further. Engaging in hunting practices often and on large scales, the Romans eliminated many species of animals around the Mediterranean. Mining and hydraulic mining altered the land as well, causing major erosion, removing hillsides, and clogging streams. Finally, the grazing of domesticated animals had a harsh effect on the land. Overgrazing was a common habit of many Romans, and it helped to make deforestation permanent in their semi-arid climate. The Romans had many techniques that allowed them to keep healthy soil, such as allowing fallow fields in alternate years. They also used a variety of fertilizers on the land and used advanced practices of irrigation and drainage. However, despite their efforts, much of their agriculture failed, leading to shortages of food that may have finally contributed to the fall of Rome. The Romans also produced a fair amount of pollution. Fires, lamps, potter's kilns, baker's ovens, the furnaces and hypocausts, or underfloor fires of the large and numerous baths, all added their smoke to the dust raised by countless human activities. Resulting from the Roman utilitarian ideal that the earth was at their disposal, and though they valued its beauty, they did not adapt their society and economy to the limits of their environment, leading the civilization toward demise. They depleted many of the natural resources they had relied on to build their empire, leaving them with a desolate land, marginalizing their capacity to survive. Many of the developments that the Roman civilization is praised for today, such as the great structures like the Colosseum that it erected during its peak and the spread of its commerce, accelerated the empire in its downfall. Both the structures and the spread of commerce extended their impact on nature. The Romans tried to understand nature, but they did not, and in our final analysis, this can be attributed in part to causing the downfall of the Roman Empire. Similar to the ancients before us, our actions have had a negative impact on the environment around us, The impacts of our current civilization are widespread and in many aspects, such as extinctions, irreversible. At an accelerating rate and on a global scale, many of the same problems are being experienced. Deforestation, pollution of the atmosphere, pollution in the ocean, and rising animal extinction rates. However, unlike our ancient counterparts, our modern society has the technology, the population, and the resource use dynamic to generate impacts, some irreversible, at an accelerated rate and global scope. In this regard, our profile of degradation is much more severe and the consequences much more accelerated from those fallen civilizations of the ancient past. Much like the attitudes of our ancients, it is evident that the modern ecological crisis is to a great extent the result of attitudes which see nature as something to be freely conquered, used, and dominated without calculation of the resultant cost to mankind and the earth. Provided by the example of these ancient peoples and empires of the past, it has become apparent that only once we recognize and accept the limitations of our actions and their resonance in the natural world will we strike the harmony that allows both human civilization and the environment to coexist sustainably.